This
All right.
conference will now be recorded.
All right. Like Michelle said, I'm a project engineer up here in Sault Ste. Marie at the new lock at the Sioux project. So I'll start by going over where are the Sioux locks exactly. So we are in the UP of Michigan. We're located on the St. Mary's River, which connects Lake Superior to Lake Huron. So between Lake Superior and Lake Huron, there's actually a 21-foot elevation drop, and most of that drop is seen right here in Sault Ste. Marie. So what that does is that actually forms rapids in the rivers that vessels cannot traffic through. So we've created the locks here to make it so that vessels can get between Lake Superior and Huron. So just a quick overview on how the locks work. As you can see on the top image, the boat is coming in from Lake Superior. The upper gates are open and the lower gates are closed. So the boat enters at the Lake Superior elevation. Once it's in the lock, the upper gates are closed and the elevation is lowered to the Lake Huron level, and then the lower gates are open, as you can see in the bottom image, so the vessel can leave the locks and head down to Lake Huron. So basically a giant boat elevator to get vessels between the two lakes. So a little history of the Sioux and its importance over time. So on the left image, you can see an image showing what vessel traffic looked like on the Great Lakes between 1897 and 1907. And as you can see, even then, boats were headed out from Duluth from the mines there, and then using the Sioux locks to get down to the steel mills on the lower Great Lakes. And then on the right is an image of today, and you can see vessels are taking the same routes. So the system's been working for well over 150 years and continues to operate today. Just a little tidbit on the importance of the locks. So in World War II, the locks were so important to maintaining our steel production for our war efforts that 12,000 soldiers were stationed here in Sault Ste. Marie to protect the locks. So in these images, you can see soldiers up on the tower protecting the locks and then walking across the miter gate. So as of today, there are two operational locks at the Sioux. There's the MacArthur lock, which is on the southern end of the facility. And then just north of that is the Poe lock. The MacArthur lock is 80 feet wide by 800 feet long and was constructed in 1943. And then the Poe lock is 110 feet wide by 1,200 feet long and was built in 1969. The Sabin and Davis locks, which are to the north of the facility, were decommissioned in the early 2000s and are no longer used to lock vessels since their age was not allowing for them to continue operation. So the Poe lock at the Sioux is the only vessel that can lock through the 1,000-foot vessels that we see on the Great Lakes. So nearly 90% of all the tonnage that comes through the facility has to go through the Poe. There are 13 1,000-foot vessels that we see on the Great Lakes that transit through the Poe lock. So what that means is that this one 52-year-old lock with a 50-year design life is the potential single point of failure in our nation's supply chain of iron ore, from the iron ore mines up in Duluth down to the steel mills on the lower Great Lakes. This is an issue because nearly all domestically produced high-strength steel is made with iron ore that transits the Poe lock, and it is estimated that within 2 to 6 weeks of an unscheduled closure of the Poe, 75% of our nation's high-strength steel production would cease. This would also impact, or because of this, we would shut down automobile, appliance, and heavy equipment manufacturing across the country. So a little summary of the locks we've had here at the Sioux. The first lock was the State Lock in 1855. Then the second lock was constructed, and that was constructed in 1881, the Weitzel lock. So we had two locks on the facility at that time. Then in 1896, the Poe lock, the first Poe lock, was constructed to replace the State Lock. So we maintained those two locks. Then in 1914 and 1919, we added 2 additional locks to the facility, the Davis and Sabin, which are still here, and they're on the north side of the facility. In 1943, the Weitzel lock was replaced by the Mack lock, or the MacArthur lock. And then in 1968, the first Poe lock was replaced with the second Poe lock. Now we're scheduled to have the new lock at the Sioux in place by 2030, which will replace the Sabin lock. So as you can see, previously we were maintaining about 15 to 25 years between construction of the locks, and we've no longer been on that schedule since it's been 52, or since it'll be 62 years between the Poe lock construction and the completion of the new lock. This image shows where the new lock will be constructed on the facility. So on the left, we have what the facility looks like today, with the Sabin lock being the furthest north, then the Davis, the Poe, and the MacArthur lock being the furthest south. The new lock will be constructed in the footprint of the Sabin, and then we'll be filling in the Davis lock so that we have more area on site for maintenance activities and moving around the site. The new lock will be a replica of the Poe lock, so it'll be the same size at 1,200 feet long and 110 feet wide. So we will have to widen and deepen the Sabin lock to create this new lock. So for this project, we have actually 3 phases of construction, and 2 of them are ongoing right now. So the upstream channel deepening the construction started last spring and is ongoing and should wrap up this fall. The upstream approach walls, which you can see in yellow, is phase 2. That construction started this spring and it'll wrap up in 2023. And then we have the new lock chamber, which is actually still in design. That contract will be awarded this winter, and then we'll have construction starting next spring with an end date of 2030. We could see a sooner end date if everything is favorable, if we get funding, and if we have good weather throughout the years, because our winters can definitely slow down construction. So I'm going to dive a little deeper onto each of the phases. So phase 1, the channel deepening. What we're doing there is that in the north channel right now we have depths of about 25 feet, and that's not deep enough for our modern vessels to transit through. So we're deepening most of that channel to about 5 feet to a 30-foot depth. That means we're removing 300,000 cubic yards of Jacobsville sandstone. And as you can see here in yellow is where there's bedrock, so we have to break up the bedrock and then remove it. And then in green is where there's overburden, shallower than 30 feet. And overburden is material that's settled on top of the bedrock. All of that material is being taken and then placed on our northwest pier, which you can see in red. So like I said,
there, right? And type, and so I was standing like this.
Sounds like someone's not on mute, so if you could mute your microphone.
I really don't need to share.
All right, so we did award that contract in January of 2020 to Trade West Construction of Nevada, and they were able to get on site last spring. To date, they're about 70% through with the work of removing that material, and are on track to be completed this fall. This image here is a survey showing the depths of the channel. So in red is where the channel is not to the 30-foot depth, and then in blue is where we've reached that 30-foot depth that's required. So the top image you can see is from the spring of last year before work started, and then the bottom image is from winter of last year, right before the contractor finished for the season. And you can see last year they were able to do a lot of work in the very upstream end, and then a lot of work in the downstream end of the channel. Another before and after image from last year. We did have to do work at the placement site, so we cleared out the vegetation, which will be replaced at the end of the project, and created a haul road for that placement area so we can get around it in future years. And then as you can see, material was placed all along that area last year while they were doing work. So these are some construction photos. On the left is the eccentric ripper, which is used like a giant jackhammer to break up the bedrock. And then on the right, we have a bucket that's removing that material that's been broken up out of the channel and placing it in a barge before it gets taken to the placement site by haul trucks. These are some images of what we're actually removing. So the two left photos are the bedrock that's gotten removed. And as you can see, we've pulled out some pretty big chunks of rock from the bottom of the channel. And then on the right is the overburden that we've removed from the areas where where there wasn't bedrock to break up. Our second phase of construction is to actually rehabilitate the approach walls to the new lock. So these walls were constructed with the Saban and Davis locks in the early 1900s. So they're over 100 years old and in disrepair. So there's a couple of different methods we'll be using, and that's what the different colors are for how we repair the walls based on their level of disrepair. This contract was awarded to Kokosing Alberici in September of last year, and they were able to get on site this April to begin work. And they are scheduled to be completed by the fall of 2023. So one of the first things the approach wall contractor is doing is actually creating a concrete plant to produce all the concrete they'll need for this project. Otherwise, you have to get concrete from the mainland and then barge it across with trucks. So on the left-hand side, we have an image of the concrete plant being built in the foreground with a crane there. And then in the background is the placement area where Trade West has been placing the material from the upstream channel deepening. On the right, we have an image of concrete trucks actually being barged across with a boat in the background. So we did have to get concrete trucks across to place the foundations for the concrete plant that's being constructed on site. Another one of our first activities is in the SLUICEWAY, which is lets water through to our Unit 10 power plant just north of the Saban Lock. That SLUICEWAY is no longer needed, so we've constructed a stone dam behind the SLUICEWAY, as you can see in green there. And then we had to demo out the SLUICEWAY, and then we'll be constructing steel sheet pile cells along where the SLUICEWAY was to connect the approach walls to the new lock chamber. So in these images on the left, we have this stone being placed for that stone cofferdam with a material handler. And then on the right, you can actually see that stone cofferdam kind of in the right side of the image. And then we have the eccentric ripper actually demoing out the SLUICEWAY underwater to get it to the correct elevation so we can place the new cells. Another activity we have is adding cells along the approach walls. And this is so that we can push the vessels a little more into the center of the channel. Because if the 1,000-foot vessels were to ride along the current approach walls, they would impact the railroad bridge that we have going across the channel. So we'll be constructing 30-foot cells to make sure that that doesn't happen. Here we have on the left an image of the stone that will fill the cells before they're capped with concrete. And that stone was actually delivered by the barge Menominee to the site. And then on the right, we have a template that'll be used to construct the cells. So that template gets placed in the water, and then steel sheet piles are driven around it to create the cell and lock together. And then the template's able to be removed and used for the next cell. Our third and final phase of construction will be the new lock chamber, which, like I said, is in design, and they'll be awarded this winter with construction starting next spring. So this is actually the main part of the project, and this is to create the chamber itself, which I said will be a duplicate of the PO, just with some upgrades for safety and new technologies that we've had since the PO was constructed. So this again will be 1,200 feet long, 110 feet wide, and then 32 feet deep. And it'll be, as you can see here, in the place of the Sabin lock. So you can see the Sabin kind of behind the chamber, and then the Davis lock will be filled in with material. So a couple key features of the new lock. We have the miter gates in yellow, which are used to hold the pool of the chamber as the boats are locking through. These will be the same as the PO lock. Then we have the filling and emptying system. So both the PO and the new lock are filled through culverts in the walls that fill laterals that are in the floor of the lock, so the water enters and exits through the floor. And then in red and the red stripes, you can see the upstream and downstream ship arresters. So again, we have these on the PO, and they're used in case the vessel loses control. They can stop the vessel before it impacts the gate. And the gates are the most crucial part of the lock, so it's very important to protect those. And then finally, in green, we have hands-free mooring. And this will be a new system to the new lock, something the PO doesn't have. And I'll go into more detail on that. So the hands-free mooring will actually replace line handlers for much of the season. So line handlers right now take lines from the vessels and put them around our yellow bollards to hold the vessel to the wall as it's locked up and down, so it's not moving back and forth in the lock. The hands-free mooring units will replace this. They have large suction cups on them, which will reach out and grab the vessels and then hold them in place and move up or down along with the vessel as it's locked through. So you can actually see one of those units there on the right. We'll have 4 of these units on the north side, which is where our vessels normally are moored to when they're locking through. And then we'll have 3 units on the south side in case a vessel comes in and is pushed by the wind to the south side and isn't able to get back over to the north side. So just a little wrap up on the project's economic impact. So this project is estimated to be over $1 billion and will take 7 to 10 years to construct. So we began construction last spring in 2020. It'll create 1,240 jobs on an annual basis. So 600 of these are direct, which means workers who are doing the construction or the construction management. 210 indirect jobs, which are workers who are manufacturing materials for the project or supplying services not on site. And then 430 induced jobs, which are jobs that are created when the workers here in town are spending their money, so restaurants and different businesses. We will use 950,000 tons of limestone or granite to make the concrete for the project, 55,000 tons of American-made cement, and then 25,000 tons of American-made steel. So that's all I have, so I'll hand it back over to Michelle.
Thank you for that, Kristina. Let me get my slide up while we give people a few minutes to enter any questions they might have for comments into the chat function. I will just quickly review the status of our visitor center. Both visitor centers in the Detroit district are now open. As you can see on the screen there, the visitor center in Duluth, Minnesota is open Thursday through Sunday from 10 to 6. They're doing vessel and arrival and departure announcements. There's a cell phone tour outdoors, and a virtual online tour of the visitor center is available. And their cooperating association is operating a museum store both online and outdoors. At the Soo Locks, we're open daily from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. The boat schedule hotline is up and running, which you see the phone number there, And we have online exhibits and information sheets now on the Detroit District webpage that you can go to get our typical handouts and also copies of, or I should say, PDFs of all of the recent exhibits in the Visitor Center. And we'll start with the questions, and I'm also going to post in Kristina's contact information there in case people have follow-up questions. The first one we had here is one that comes in quite a bit. What will the new lock be named? Is there any thought to the Harvey lock for Charles T. Harvey, who I believe built the first lock in 1855 or so? That's Fred asking that.
All right. Well, I wish I could tell you, but the way that locks get named is actually a congressperson has to put in a bill to name the lock and present it before Congress, and then it's voted on, and it has to be voted into law to be named. And actually, all of the other locks at the site haven't been named until the lock was finished and was operational. So we likely won't see a name for the new lock for another 9 years.
Okay. And Ron is asking, there was the blockage this year in the Suez Canal. Can a ship get stuck in the Soo locks?
So I will say that the way that the facility is set up, they likely would not get stuck like they did at the Suez, turn sideways or anything. But along the river, it's possible. We do maintain the river to the depths that the locks need, but if something were to roll into the river or the boat for some reason exited the channel, they could bottom out and get stuck in the river.
And I will just add that while it's not quite as dramatic as what happened in the Suez Canal, in the MacArthur lock, there is a pinch point because the pier takes a slight dog leg as it's heading out on the west end, which is the reason lots of people ask why we only take boats that are 730 feet long. Because a 740-foot long boat, it creates about a 6-inch gap, which could turn into a pretty serious pinch point if anyone is impacted by wind or a change in the water. Just a little fact to know. Steve is asking, is the fill area meant to be a windbreak? Which also kind of plays on a question I had, which is how tall is that going to be out on the Northwest Pier?
So it'll actually be from the top of lock wall to the top of the pile about 80 feet. And it was not meant to be a windbreak, but it will be a windbreak. So when vessels are coming in and there's a wind out of the north, they can get pushed to the south when they're trying to stay along the north wall. So that placement area will likely help in those situations.
And Jay Hancock is asking, how long has the technology for hands-free mooring been in use? Are there any examples of current systems in use?
Yeah, so I thinking about 2015, the Canadian locks along the St. Lawrence Seaway actually had the technology developed to replace their line handling on those locks and put those into place. And then the two American locks along the St. Lawrence Seaway replaced their systems with the same hands-free mooring shortly after that. So all of the St. Lawrence Seaway locks have that technology.
And Richard Bruss is asking, of the $1 billion cost, how much is materials and how much is labor?
So that's kind of a hard one to answer because most of that money is spent on contracts, and we don't get the breakdown from the contractor on what is their labor versus what is their materials. But I will say labor for the core employees who are doing design and construction is a very small percent, so probably 5% of the cost, and then the rest is the contracts that we award.
Okay. And then we had a question here. So with the size of the new lock, does that mean that 1,000-foot ships are the biggest expected on the Great Lakes?
Yeah, so we do expect those to be the biggest. We actually haven't seen a new ship built in about 30 years, but there's one being constructed right now on the Great Lakes. And that one would actually fit in the Mack lock, just because of the efficiencies of building that ship. That's the size they decided to go with. And another thing is we wouldn't want there to be bigger ships, because if the new lock were bigger and allowed bigger ships, then we'd get to the same point we're at now, where ships can only go through one lock. So if that lock is down, then they're stuck either in Lake Superior or Lake Huron.
And I'll just add, being a boat nerd, another kind of limiting factor on the 1,000 feet is the difficulty of navigating the St. Mary's River, and also the design of the docks in the ports on the Great Lakes. In terms of turning basins and the configurations, at least for right now, 1,000 is kind of where it's maxed out. Ron is asking, if the Poe is being repaired and maintained, what lock do the big ships use?
Yeah, so the Poe lock, we actually try to do most of our maintenance during our shutdown season. So the locks are shut down from mid-January to late March every year. So most of the work on the Poe is done during that time. If we do have to do any sort of emergency repair, we try to shut down the lock for as short a period as possible. I think in recent years, the longest we've had it shut down is 8 hours. But if the Poe were to have a major issue, then the boats would be stuck on whatever side they're on if they can't fit into the Mack lock. So that's the reason that we need another lock, is so that if the Poe or the new lock needs repairs, then we'll have a second lock for the ships to use.
Okay. And Cassandra is asking, what's the average number of boats that come through the Soo locks every day?
I'm actually going to let you answer that one, Michelle. I bet you have a better idea than me.
That's one I answer several times a day at the visitor center. And the standard answer is that there is no hard and fast average day to day. It varies depending on what's happening in the ports. It can vary depending on the weather. For instance, if we have fog, if you kind of imagine when you're driving on an interstate and you're just speeding along all by yourself, and then there's some construction or there's an accident, and then all the cars end up bunched up. It kind of happens the same way with shipping traffic. When there's weather or there's a equipment breakdown in a port at one of the loading docks or an unloading facility. So there is absolutely no average day to day, but every year it's approximately 7,000 lockages. So sometimes that's the same boats, but we do approximately 7,000 lockages every year during our operating season, which is about 10 months. Steve is asking, are there plans to extend the shipping season?
Right now, there are not. And a big reason for the shipping season is actually the icing over the Great Lakes. So it does get harder for vessels to move during that time. Once the new lock is online and is usable, then we'll be looking at whether the Poe and the new lock will have different maintenance seasons, just because we could work on them in the summer because we have a second lock to use.
And as a park ranger who spends the winter out photographing all of that winter work, summer would be way better. Way better.
I think the workers would agree.
Yeah, exactly. Fred is asking, is the Canadian Soo lock out of service?
No, the Canadian lock is still in service. It's much smaller than any of our locks at the Soo. So it's used mainly for recreational traffic. Small boats, and then you can actually take your kayak or canoe through the Canadian lock.
And Fred is also commenting that he loved the video of the moose locking through. And I'm pretty sure that was in the Canadian lock.
Yep.
We've had moose come out of the water over by the Soo lock boat tours in just the last few years, but to my knowledge, we've not had one through the American locks. And any other questions? And I would like to let the other moderators on here know that my chat is not working. So if they have the links handy, if they could post them, I would appreciate it. There's always some sort of new technical issue. And also, Kristina, not to be like critical and like super particular, but there's been 52 years between locks. Because I track the age of the pole lock by my own age, and I'm 52.
Okay.
I am not 62.
So
Made
the
me pause.
62 is when the lock gets finished. So 2030, when the lock is finished.
Okay. Okay. I was going by today and I was like, wait a minute, I'm not that close to retiring. All right. With that, I will once again highlight our next program, which is going to be August 5th, 2021, 11:30 Central Time, 12:30 Eastern Daylight Time, and it will be about the SS Meteor, the last surviving whaleback vessel on the Great Lakes. And also, I want to share the links to best ways to get in touch with us. On there, you will see our Facebook sites. You'll also find the phone numbers and places to look for the vessel schedules, and of course, our webpage and that YouTube channel link and the survey link. Unfortunately, my chat is not working for some reason. I'm unable to post those survey links and the YouTube links in the chat, but hopefully you can jot those down. Or if you do a Google search for U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Detroit District YouTube, you will see a playlist for Virtual Visitor Center. So you can find that. And we've got lots of nice comments for Kristina. And I also want to extend my thanks for her for giving us this project update on what is probably one of the biggest construction projects in the Detroit district for at least 52 years.
Thanks, Michelle, and thanks everybody. I enjoyed doing it.